Good morning, friends. Welcome to Empty Cloud Monastery. I am Ayya Soma, and I am here with Bhante Sundaso here to my left. Also, he's in disguise this morning. I was trying to get him in front of the camera, but he said tomorrow he will appear. And hello also to our new resident here. Very good. Welcome. And welcome to Geeta, Michael, and Fernanda, who are checking in. So this morning we will start our series on Dhamma for householders. Not that usually we don't talk about Dhamma for householders, but sometimes there can be a bit um, of a confusion because we talk about a lot of monastics and a lot of talks. Well, actually, all of our talks are offered by people in robes. So some of our lay friends expressed the need to have topics specifically for householders. So hopefully this series will create some clarification. And welcome to Kumu, Jayanta, and Anita. Good to see you, friend. All right, let's start by paying homage to our original teacher, Shakyamuni Buddha. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddham dhammam sangham namasami. Welcome also to Michael and Jay who are checking in. So today is the Upasatha. So every 2 weeks, on the new moon day and on the full moon day, since the time of the Buddha, followers of the Buddha have been coming together to take the 8 precepts and practice as a reminder, what is the purpose? Why are we taking refuge in Buddha, Dhamma, and Sangha? And why are we actually, what is the goal of the path? So it's a reminder both in terms of intention and also in terms of practice. So as monastics, we are constantly on the 8 precepts. In fact, we have significantly more precepts. But as householders, usually we're on the 5 precepts in Buddhism. And during the Uposatha and other special occasions, like going to the monastery perhaps and doing a meditation retreat, or some lay friends who are actually very committed and then also decide to take the 8 precepts for longer periods of time, or perhaps take actually anagarika vows. So for a period of time, if not for all their, the rest of their life, they take the 8 precepts. So, recently we had Ajahn Pasano who kindly offered to answer some questions for us monastics during our monk chat a few weeks ago. By the way, public service announcement, we will have also Ajahn Brahm doing the same thing this Friday evening. So make sure to tune in on our channel at that time at 7:30 p.m. New York City time. But anyway, it was very interesting how Ajahn Pasano actually, when we were us monastics, we were inquiring about stream entry, and there were a lot of different questions actually on the jhanas and on samadhi in relation to stream entry. He actually put us all on track, reminding us actually that the levels of sort of perfected concentration that we tend to obsess with actually are necessary a little bit later on in the path. But at the very beginning, in order to enter the stream, actually what we need to do is cultivate, yes, absolutely, a stillness of mind that allows us to see right view, to understand the path. But fundamentally, what we need to do is more purify, all our actions, focus on the rest of the Noble Eightfold Path, I would say. And we see actually on Actually, one of the things, the beautiful reminders that Ajahn gave us is that really, when one sees at the time of the Buddha, actually, there were more stream enters that were lay people than there were stream enters that were monastics. And perhaps one can, get very shocked at this statement, but in reality, actually, um, it's something to rejoice in, something to actually delight the mind in. Fundamentally, because obviously there are more lay people than there are monastics. Even in Buddhist countries where there are a lot of monastics, well, there are still more lay people than there are monastics. So it's quite actually beautiful to see that that this path is accessible in any kind of shape and form that we are right now in, or that we feel comfortable that we're right in. So what we're doing is fundamentally really committing ourselves to liberation, and then whatever sort of form, if it's the monastic form or if it's the lay form that is supportive towards the path, then we keep that form or we change into a new form. But fundamentally, it's the result, the one that counts. And on the Upasatha, it is very important to recollect actually what this purpose is, what are the teachings of the Buddha in this respect. And when Visakha, the householder, goes to, there's this beautiful sutta in the Anguttara Nikaya where she goes to the Buddha, and she tells the Buddha that she's going to practice the Upasatha, and the Buddha gives her a teaching on the different kinds of Upasathas that are there. And first and foremost, what is the Upasatha? So the Upasatha is, as we said earlier, this day where we commit to taking precepts a little bit more than we do usually. Or if we're monastics, once again, we take the precepts that we are normally in. We confess any type of transgression that we have committed, and we recommit ourselves to the path. So it's a day of celebration of purification in a way, which is fundamentally the Buddhist path. We're purifying the mind. But it's also important to see that actually dedicating a period of time for purification is present in actually a lot of different spiritual traditions. Perhaps in Judeo-Christian countries, we're more familiar with the Sabbath, or with Lent, or Ramadan is also another period where people will take the time to fast or eat certain particular foods, or just take the time to point their minds towards spiritual practice. So how is the Upasatha in Buddhism different? Or how is it similar? Well, I won't answer this question for you. That will be your investigation, your duty to understand the purpose of all of this. But what the Buddha says in that discourse to Visakha is that, once again, there are three different types of Upasatha. The one that he calls the cowherder Upasatha. So fundamentally, the cowherd, for those urbanites who don't know, perhaps what these figures did back in the day is someone who was taking care of cows. Actually, there's still cowherders up to this day in a lot of different countries. I don't know if it happens today in the United States anymore, but there are definitely cowherders or animal herders in Italy. I used to see them a lot growing up. So fundamentally, when someone is taking care of a group of animals, what they do is they check and see, okay, the animals today are eating and drinking such and such things, and tomorrow they will be drinking such and such things. And so the Buddha says, well, that's a way actually that we can also approach the Upasatha, Like, for example, today we can get We can practice the 8 precepts. So there are certain things that are allowable and not allowable after noon. Well, first of all, we only eat after up until noon, right? Our lay friend here, well, she has no option, so she's on the 8 precepts for the entire time. So the Upasatha as well as the next 2 weeks. But yeah, so there are certain things that then there are tonics that the Buddha allowed us to take after noon. So we can have a kind of list. Actually, we do have a list, in fact, on the walls of the kitchen that clarify what is allowable and what is not allowable. And so if we only take, for example, the precepts for one day, it is very likely, if we're used to having dinner, that we're going to experience a lot of hunger coming this afternoon. Or perhaps we won't really like the allowables that are accessible in the afternoon, and we're going to start dreaming about every single type of other thing that is not allowable. At least this is what was happening to me when I first got on the 8 precepts. I was like, if only I could have anything that is not allowable, then I will be happy. And probably if what I was craving was allowable, I wouldn't have wanted that either, right? It's just interesting how the mind works. So then we can spend the entire afternoon just dreaming for it to be tomorrow, so that then we can stuff our face with ice cream or with whatever kind of thing that we're craving in that moment. May I have dinner tomorrow, etc. Becomes very unbearable. So that way, we're not really. The Buddha says it's actually not terribly fruitful to take the precepts in this way. And fundamentally, what we're doing, if we're taking the precepts in this way, is cultivating a lot of greed and delusion. I mean, it's better than nothing in the way that we're still. Doesn't say exactly that it's a waste of time, but he says it's not particularly fruitful, right? It's not actually conducive towards full liberation. So fundamentally, my understanding is the Buddha is highlighting how just by following or taking certain precepts, if we don't put also a precise intention or understand why we're taking them, they are beneficial up to a certain extent. And definitely they won't purify us alone. That practice won't be beneficial in and of itself. And then the Buddha says that there's another type of way to practice the Uposatha, and he defines it as the Upasata of the Nigantas, which were a sect back in the time of the Buddha, one of the different sects practicing, doing different ascetic practices. And the Buddha also describes different rites and rituals that the Nigantas are doing for the Upasata. And fundamentally what he aims at is, he says that these practices are useless in the best case scenario, and sometimes are actually even harmful. And today we can see the equivalent in actually different sects within also Judeo-Christian, actually. How do you say, groups where they're sometimes actually not following the text at all. There is a group in New York City that actually every year at around this time, that is the time of atonement. What they do is they do a lot of chicken sacrifices. So the idea in that particular religion is that this period of time is a time for atonement of one's sins. And that particular sect within the religion at large has this tradition of transferring one's sins to the chicken, and then cutting the throat of the chicken. And then there's like blood and a lot of awfulness spreading all around. And it's pretty horrific actually to see, pretty horrific to be around, pretty horrific to read about it. But they actually really have this strong belief, and it's period of time where that they dedicate every year to do this sacrifice. There are like stories like this, to one degree or another in pretty much any spiritual tradition. But fundamentally, we see that actually the Buddha and in other suttas he addresses that, because animal sacrifice is as old as as old as time. And definitely, if it happens today, it was definitely happening a long time ago, too, and definitely so at the time of the Buddha. And so the Buddha points out how not only one is not actually purifying their mind, but actually, in fact, when they are making such unwholesome deeds, they're making even worse actions. So instead of the purification, we're actually doing the dirtification. I don't know if that's English. The dirtification of mind. And that's when it is harmful. So, yeah, that's definitely not the way through which we should dedicate our time to any type of time during normal days, let alone dedicate a particular time to actually make bad deeds. And so then the third way of practicing the Upasatha, the Buddha says that it's the one that instead is very beneficial and fruitful. And it's the practice, and it's how the Upasatha is practiced by the noble ones. And so it's interesting that actually the Buddha starts by saying that the like sort of the foremost at the very beginning, not the foremost, I mean the foremost, but also like just at the very beginning to recollect Buddha, Dhamma, and Sangha, and that alone actually creates a lot of placidity and happiness of mind. At the very beginning of my practice, not being quite the faithful person, and actually being the stereotypical, in certain respects, Westerner who, you know, was agnostic and borderline atheist and approaching Buddhism, and not being not having cultivated any sort of devotional kind of inclination, it was very difficult for me to recollect Buddha, Dhamma, and Sangha. As a matter of fact, we do it every morning here at the monastery, and pretty much every monastery, it's the tipiso. So recollecting, bringing to mind the qualities of the Buddha, and bringing to mind the qualities of the Dhamma, and bringing to mind the qualities of the Sangha. And it was interesting how at the very beginning, it was kind of like this sort of dry exercise that was mostly intellectual rather than of the heart. But as time went by, then it started really growing in my mind, and not growing artificially, but rather as we start purifying rather than dirtifying the mind. Then, in a way, actually, we become closer and closer to the Buddha. And we start seeing how it's possible actually to cultivate these incredible qualities, and how the Buddha has perfected them, and he's absolutely worthy of honoring. And how the Dhamma is, in fact, not something, just a bunch of books to read, or a bunch of words to listen to during a Dhamma talks, but actually it's how things are. And it's something that it's relevant. It's something that that invites us to come and see for ourselves, to experience, and to transform our minds with it. So we start having an experiential understanding of the incredible qualities of the Dhamma. And as we hang out with practitioners, and especially the monastics that are ahead of us in the path, and we started meeting some really impressive practitioners. So the qualities of the Sangha become, yeah, quite evident, and quite possible. And then we also hear, like, rather unimpressive stories of these monastics back in the day, which actually always make me feel really better, really good. Like, oh, that's great. I can't believe that Bhante Ji used to be an aversive type. Apparently, Bhante Gunaratana, and I'm not throwing him under the bus. He actually wrote an autobiography, so you can find his words on it. But yeah, when he's now 95, so he's been a monastic, he's been in robes for quite some time. But when he was in his 20s, nobody wanted to live with him. He was grumpy all the time, and apparently quite short-tempered and harsh. And you meet him now, and you're like, how is it possible? It's like the most patient and loving and incredibly inspiring being. How is it possible that these two sort of stories are the same, like this reality that I'm experiencing and this story from the past? But actually, one needs to rejoice. That is what makes the Dhamma alive, actually. What makes stories like Angulimala, relevant. Not that Bhanteji was Angulimala, he wasn't killing, that I'm aware of, sentient beings and creating, accessories with their fingers and stuff like that. But really, we see that every single person can actually, no matter where they are on the path, if they really truly commit to Buddha, Dhamma, and Sangha, they really commit to the path, they can start transforming themselves. And so it's quite actually heartwarming for me when I think about, my defiled mind going, oh, well, actually, I too, I can practice this path and purify it. And in fact, I have. I am doing it. In hindsight, I can see, oh wow, there's been a lot of work that has been done in all these years that I've been practicing so far. And actually, it's quite fast. It's quite rapid. It's actually the most rapid progress of mine that I've ever been able to accomplish in this lifetime, and probably lifetimes as well. There's still a long way to go, but still, we can get confidence. And actually, just by saying these words, my mind is becoming elated and placid. So I'm recollecting all these incredible qualities of the Buddha, of the Dhamma, of the Sangha. Isn't it beautiful? And also recollecting then the progress that I've done on the path, which means the virtue, recollecting virtue, which is what the Buddha then recommends for us to do afterwards. And really patting ourselves on the shoulders, going like, yeah, actually, you've been practicing all these precepts. You haven't lied, you haven't stolen, you haven't killed anything. If I remember when I was a layperson prior to taking refuge and the five precepts as a as a Buddhist, I used to commit all these genocides of different beings, not humans but mosquitoes and anything that was really kind of small, a small insect. In my mind, it had no reason to exist. It's really sad to think that was the sort of condition of my mind, but also like incredibly amazing now to think that has been completely eliminated from my mind. Right now, there is no tendency towards harming any such a being. In fact, it seems so weird that this mind was ever able to conceive such a thought. So what an incredible miracle of Dhamma that alone has disappeared, right? And so we can recollect our own virtue in that way, like, wow, incredible. From serial killer, from Angulimala of insects, to actually saint of insects. Right now, I can also help them. It's quite remarkable, isn't it? And yeah, and then moving forward, we can start contemplating all the good things that we do for ourselves and others. And without any shame, we don't have to play any like sort of false modesty in Buddhism when it comes to these things. If anything, actually, we should um, recollect them more and more often. And yes, pat ourselves on the shoulder and also inspire others to do the same. So, yeah, we should be proud that we are practicing virtue, not having the conceit of superiority, but also not having the conceit of false modesty. Or being, or having this like, oh yeah, no, 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 I'm not really that great. No, you could go, yeah, I'm great. I'm doing great. And I should do even greater. I am capable of doing even greater. And yeah, and then elating the mind by recollecting these qualities. And also, then the Buddha encourages us to reflect that cultivating these qualities makes us very similar to devas. So basically, we become like angels fundamentally by um, developing these qualities of faith in Buddha, Dhamma, and Sangha. These qualities of generosity, of giving, of letting go, um, these qualities of wisdom that come actually with this practice, and these qualities of learning the Dhamma as we are on this channel on a regular basis, but also in every monastery. We always have any Buddhist monastery, we always have the opportunity to develop all of these elements that actually the Buddha says create the conditions for rebirth in as a divine being. So we can see how we are creating qualities that make us divine. Isn't it incredible? Right? And we can rejoice that. But then, most importantly, on the Upasatha, when we take the 8 precepts, the Buddha encourages us to reflect that we are fundamentally acting like enlightened beings. Makes me smile every time. Right? Like an enlightened being cannot kill, and just like an enlightened being, we commit not to kill any sentient being for an entire day. It's wonderful. For an entire day, we commit ourselves not to steal, not to take anything that has not been given to us, just like an enlightened being. For one day, we have no sexual interactions whatsoever, just like an enlightened being who has uprooted any type of craving for sensual pleasures. So for one day, we can relax and actually enjoy the fact that we can practice without any craving, once again, like the enlightened ones. And for one day, at least, we can have impeccable speech, not say any type of lie, not say anything harsh, not saying anything divisive, and start creating this aura of trust around us. It's always lovely being around, monastics who are on these precepts, and you always know that they're telling the truth. It's actually so relaxing and so comforting. There's never like any type of shock. Like, oh, why did you say this or that? I mean, this can happen only when it's undeveloped practitioners, but if it's developed practitioners, there's never that It's impossible to for them to lie. Isn't it incredible? It's wonderful. And also, we can abstain from intoxicants for one day and really enjoy what it is to have, yeah, um, stable mind, a mind that is not weakened by any substance, just like an enlightened being in a condition of that is conducive to mindfulness rather than conducive to distraction, conducive to, well, breaking all the other precepts, actually, conducive to making unwholesome acts. And then we can commit to not eat after noon, as we were mentioning earlier, and only take certain things after the appropriate hour, which are allowable, and reflecting that that's basically the natural state of being of an arhat. And then we can also take on the practice of not adorning ourselves, not doing any sort of act of beautification, not worrying about what we look like from, with this lump of meat that we're so obsessed with it all the time, like trying to make it prettier than what it is, when in reality it's just a bunch of meat. So getting closer and closer to how an awakened being relates to it as something, as a vehicle for liberation, like something that is useful, that is yeah, that helps us on our path towards awakening, rather than is this obsessive thing that we're constantly thinking about. And then the last is like not using high or luxurious beds. When we were in Thailand, so in the United States, it's a little bit difficult because pretty much anything that is not sort of luxurious, I think it's still luxurious to one degree or the other. Like we have pretty Spartan beds here at the monastery, but there's still nothing like the nice mats that we had in Thailand when we were traveling around, or in Taiwan, very very thin mats. You're basically sleeping on the floor. But yeah, fundamentally, it doesn't matter whether we have a thin mat or a bigger sort of mat. The important thing is not to have those over the top, like sort of sleeping arrangements where it's actually really comfortable to sleep. And I would have to say that in America, they've mastered the mattress operation. I remember when I had first moved here, I had never even could even, I didn't even know it existed, like a king size bed. It was just like literally the bed of a king. I remember when I first slept on it, and I started rolling on it over and over, because it's just like basically having a studio flat that is made out of a bed. And then I slept on it. It was so comfortable, most comfortable like place I had ever laid my back on, and I did not want to get up. I am not kidding. I literally was like, "Wow, this is great." And so we see how all these comforts are actually not terribly conducive to practice, because we're like, ah, yeah, 5 more minutes, 10 more minutes, about an hour. Maybe you're spending the entire day in bed if you can. But it's important to, you know, um, reflect that once again, we're taking these precepts, that not of these precepts are going to be, the vehicle of liberation in and of itself, but rather they're going to create the conditions for us to reflect on our mind states, the conditions for us to really understand what is conducive to suffering and what is conducive to the end of suffering, and then propel us towards awakening. Also, conducive give to allow us to see what are the defilements of mind, What is it that we struggle with? Had I never taken the 8 precepts as a lay person, I would have never realized that I had so many neuroses on food, to be quite frank, and how idiotic actually these neuroses were too. I mean, I had to see how um, it was really silly, as I was saying earlier, how just because something was not allowable, then my mind really wanted to crave it. But then the realization that actually, if it was also allowable, then I would not crave it. But this was not clear to me, not evident to me until I actually took the 8 precepts. So this is what is actually very helpful about sila, about the trainings of mind that the Buddha gives to us. It really allows us to um, become familiar with the mind, to understand what our um, strengths are and where our weaknesses are. And so then we can keep growing our strengths and keep weakening our weaknesses rather than doing the other way around of feeding all our defilements and then starving the goodness that we have. Mm. And by practicing in this way, we see that, the 3 fetters that prevent us from entering the stream start eroding. So we have, Sinabhatta Paramasa, so all the rites and rituals. So as the Buddha was mentioning in the other ways of practicing the Upasatha, we start actually having a bit of a different relationship with what we perceive as rites and rituals in Buddhism. They're not actually quite rites and rituals unless we turn them into rites and rituals. So checking where our intention is. And then we start eroding doubt by instead nourishing our faith in Buddha, Dhamma, and Sangha and actually giving ourselves the opportunity to practice the path and seeing how, the triple gem is a reality rather than something that we just, believe in. Becomes something that we actually do treasure, like a treasure that we have, not a treasure that we just idealize or that we think exists, but we don't really have any connection with. And then, of course, the most difficult one, Sakaya Ditti, we start having an understanding of how things are dependently arisen and that they are ultimately impersonal, have nothing to do with me. So we start throwing ourselves, kicking ourselves out of the picture and actually starting to have a more of an understanding of causality in the world, in our experience. And we see, so then the Upasata is not just this cute little Buddhist um, holiday, but rather it's an opportunity for us to enter the stream. And it doesn't matter whether we have robes or whether we are lay people. As a matter of fact, as once again Ajahn Pasano mentioned, there were more stream mentors that are lay people than are monastics. So everybody can partake and can make progress in the path. All right, so these are just a few reflections that come to mind this morning. And if you have any thoughts, comments, or questions, feel free to type them in the live chat and I'll try my best to answer them.
Anandamayang Dhammakataya Sadhukaram Dadamase
Sadhu, 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 anumodami. All right. Well, we have a few friends that also have joined us in the meanwhile. Hello to Hasim, Sapna, Aurora, Namaranta. Good to see you always. Melinda, Jonathan, Sam. Jay is watching from New Zealand and Jonathan from Israel. Wow, it's great. And Mystique, welcome. And Michael says, I'm amazed that so many persons in my circle are so uncomfortable with this reflection on our own goodness. Maybe I presented poorly. Perhaps advise me. Yes, unfortunately, I think that's dependently arisen as everything, but it's dependently arisen from our cultural conditioning. So I come from Italy, so my cultural conditioning is Catholicism, but I seem to understand that pretty much any kind of Judeo-Christian religion has that sort of imprint that we have to be a little bit modest. There's more the kind of martyr mentality. So may everybody be happy, except for me. And I should be virtuous by default. And so anything that is good about me is not worthy of mention, but what is worthy of mentioning is all my flaws. And we kind of do the same actually with other people. We always take for granted, the generosity, the kindness, all the goodness that we're actually always receiving from others in one shape or form. But aren't we good at highlighting all their flaws? Like, I have this list of all these flaws of this person, this other person, right? But all their goodness, it's kind of like, okay, yeah, of course they should be that way. So yes, with everything, in Buddhist practice, there is a learning curve. So we need to understand that, first of all, acknowledge that what we're doing or conditioned to do is not particularly wholesome. It's not conducive to the end of suffering. And so we need to rewire our minds to actually think in a different way and to cherish what it needs to be cherished and to toss what needs to be tossed. And so, of course, one can acknowledge also one's defilements. But I would say that in particular in Western culture, we're enough self-critical. So we can actually focus on recollecting our own goodness. Because the more we recollect it, the more our mind becomes happy and the more good we want to be. Instead, the more we bash ourselves, the more we think we are, really terrible. And the more we're like, okay, well, if I'm so bad, I might as well keep, breaking all the other precepts because, I'm so terrible at this one. So, so it's a domino effect. So as usual, this is suffering. This is the cause of suffering. There is an end of suffering, and there is a way out of suffering. So with everything, we should approach it in that way. I hope that's useful. But if you have any more particular questions, feel free to type them in. And Kumo asks, Ayya Soma, is the list of permitted items to eat, drink after noon posted on the site? Actually, we could post them on the site. Thank you for that idea. Yeah, it's very easy. Take a picture of it and post it. And go to see some other friends. Hello to Shreds, Kazan. And there are no other questions at this time unless they appear. Any thoughts, comments here? Well, that's all. Then I will invite you all to come again this evening, show up again on our channel this evening, because Ajahn Punadhammo will be hopefully sharing the second part of the Penitent Origination series. And then tomorrow morning and tomorrow evening, I will be here with Bhante Subdasa. And we will both share some reflections on other aspects of practicing the path in as a householder. And actually, Sake asks, how to maintain wakefulness? Well, tea is always good. But what I find, jokes aside, what I find, although actually tea does work. There is a reason why monks really like tea, but also just to um, really take interest, cultivate the mind of curiosity in everything that you do. So it's very helpful to do that in meditation practice, and then to do it in every single moment throughout our days. Like if we're washing the dishes, instead of thinking, oh dear, I have all these dishes to wash and I could be doing X, Y, and Z thing, or actually doing X, Y, and Z thing while washing the dishes, perhaps talking to that person while watching, I don't know, the weather forecast. And I don't know, there's like so much multitasking that is actually treasured these days. But Ayya Soma actually a few years ago, she was sharing how, as a matter of fact, there's a study is that multitasking creates Alzheimer's. So maybe it's not something that we want to really pursue, but rather monotasking is what actually we want to do more and more. And so menial tasks are perfect for that because actually we can enjoy really the stillness and the calmness and the focus that can come by doing something that is um, ordinary as washing the dishes. And then that creates this attitude of mind of, while walking you're walking, while seeing you're only seeing, while smelling you're only smelling, while hearing you're only hearing, and so forth, rather than while talking you're thinking, and while thinking you're seeing and smelling, and there's like lots of stuff happening at the all the time, creating confusion, which then makes us very much sleepy. We can't take it anymore. All we want to do is block out all of that and go on our king size bed and enjoy the softness and yeah, and shut everything out. And Gita says, welcome back to Bhante Sudhaza after your retreat. Yes, we're happy Bhante's back. And Sapna says, why I'm not exempt? Any people I'm not like, why? I don't know. I don't think I understand because English is my second language. So if you can rephrase a Sapna, maybe I can address that. And Anita says, Ayya, please share experiences, if ever, where you are in the moment of not being able to recollect the Dhamma. Some ideas will be helpful. Well, actually, what I find really helpful, so I've been in the past few days editing. So on our channel, you'll find these short clips of the teachings that Ajahn Pasanno shared with us recently. So it was actually like a teaching in and of itself doing that type of work, because whenever you do something for others, the first who benefits is first and foremost yourself. Because by doing all that editing, I kept on like hearing Ajahn Pasanno's words over and over again. It was delightful. So yeah, one of the things that he said, so I will be quoting him rather than me. He's a lot more quotable and more interesting than I am. Yeah, so he mentioned that, one of the qualities that we need to develop actually in the path is being able to forgive ourselves that that we're not that perfect, and kind of go back to reestablishing our commitment of the path, because obviously we're going to make mistakes, even though we want to make the right decision in every moment. Sometimes, even if we recollect the Dhamma, we're going to misinterpret the Dhamma, or we're going to be unclear of what actually the appropriate response is based on our understanding of the Dhamma. And so we're going to make the inappropriate response. And the important thing is not to get discouraged, but rather to acknowledge, because we'll see, we'll reap the consequences of that action. Um, and then judge based on the consequences of that action. Was that action wholesome or unwholesome? Well, clearly unwholesome. And why did I make that choice back then? Because we remember, why did we make that choice? And we're like, oh, okay, X, Y, and Z, it was there. Oh, in hindsight, I see causes, conditions, and consequences. So we can't control the consequences, but we can control the causes. So taking everything as a learning experience is very useful and beneficial. So we forgive ourselves, recommit, and learn from our past mistakes. And then, of course, if we have spiritual practitioners, people who are ahead of us in the path, and we can consult with them before taking an action, then that's even better. But sometimes we don't have that opportunity, or sometimes actually we're not able of communicating properly the conditions that we're dealing with the people who could potentially help us. So it's always like this battle that a lot of times we will lose, but it's okay. Eventually, no excellence can be acquired without constant practice. So the more we practice, the more we are committed to the path, the more we are inevitably going to attain awakening and then become perfect, just like the Buddha. Michael says, based on just seeing, just hearing, do you think it would be advisable to meditate upon somewhat unorthodox objects such as music or a flower? Really listen, really see? No music. Nice try. But actually, what I like to do is when we go to the forest here, we do every so often some walking meditation, hiking and meditation retreat, we call it, here at the nature reserve. And we used to do them also at the botanical garden in New York City, the beach, everywhere. Like anywhere that it's a natural environment where there's a lot of things going on. What I like to personally do is first walking meditation, just focusing on the soles of my feet, and then at a certain point stopping and doing standing meditation and absorbing with my eyes open everything. So lifting up like my gaze and taking in all the colors, the smells, the everything, but without the storytelling. Like, I like this, I don't like this. Oh, we could go here next time, or blah, 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 blah. This reminds me of that place in Italy or that other place that I saw in Germany, and I should call that person. That's usually what we do when we're kind of, practicing careless attention, which is our way to like default state of being. But instead, I find it very useful first, training the mind to take care only of the soles of the feet. So, stilling it, and then using that strength to take everything in. And yeah, and then in the herd, there will only be the herd, and it's whether it's birds singing, or if it's the leaf blowers here in West Orange, they really like leaf blowers, or whatever it is, it doesn't become any more the leaf blower or the bird or whatever. Like our sanya kind of like mellows out, and there's just the herd. And the sides then doesn't become anymore, oh, I like that pretty flower, but I don't like that other flower. Well, actually, in the forest, there are hardly any flowers. But, but point being, we can become more in tune with what the Buddha is suggesting. So these are some thoughts. So yeah, do it intentionally, but also watch your mind. And Kumu asks, what is the defilement that surfaces in us when we get upset when someone shouts at us for no wrongdoings on our part? Is it sense of self? I mean, yes, absolutely. There's always the self in the middle. But yeah, it's aversion. We don't like this. We don't like that. It has to stop, right? Because I mean, when people say lovely things at us, we don't get upset. We're like, oh, give me more, give me more. Oh, yeah. Even, I mean, if we are shy, like we're like, oh, we still like it. So it's either craving or hating, greed or hatred. And there's always the self in between, because if it's someone else, we kind of don't really care. They're like, oh, okay, we see it very objectively. We're like, okay, that person is yelling because they're having a bad day, and that person is getting upset because they're taking it personally, even though it has nothing to do with them. But when we're that person, then everything has a new flavor, huh? And Jonathan says, could you advise about non-attachment, for example, to a car? Well, actually, that is a little bit off topic. But we will have probably plenty of conversations of that in the next few days. But if we don't, then you can ask it on, actually not Mongshot this Friday, because we will have Ajahn Brown, but next Friday. But I think actually tomorrow morning or tomorrow evening, we can discuss that. All right, so that's all for this morning, and we can end with 3 sadhus. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. All right, may you be all well and happy, and may all good things come to you, and look forward to seeing you this evening.